It was a stormy evening when the front door of the family home creaked open. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the rain poured down relentlessly. The father, who had long since retired to his favorite armchair, didn't even look up from his newspaper. He was used to the silence that had settled over the house in the years since his daughter had left. But then, a voice broke the stillness. Soft at first, almost like a whisper, but unmistakable. It was a voice he knew well, one that hadn't graced their home in over 15 years. "I'm home," it said. His heart skipped a beat. He shot to his feet, his hands trembling. For a moment, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but as he looked toward the door, there she stood. The young woman at the threshold was different. She was no longer the frightened teenager he remembered, the one who had begged for a chance to stay. Her eyes held a calm that only time could bring, and there was something else, a quiet strength that radiated from her. But there was no mistaking it, this was his daughter, the same girl he had thrown out so many years ago when she was pregnant. Her presence filled the room, and the heavy weight of history between them hung in the air. She stood there, wet from the rain, her face unreadable. Neither of them spoke for what seemed like an eternity. Then, his wife appeared, her face frozen in disbelief. "Is it really you?" she asked, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. Her eyes scanned her daughter's face, as though searching for any trace of the young girl she had once known. The daughter took a step inside, her gaze meeting theirs without hesitation. She didn't speak at first, but the silence was deafening. There was so much to say, so much history to unpack, but the only sound in the room was the storm outside. "I never thought I'd see you again," the father finally managed, his voice a mix of anger, guilt, and confusion. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes didn't flinch. "I came to see you. I came to finally say what I needed to say," she replied, her tone steady. The father's mind raced. This was a moment he had never anticipated. The girl he had rejected, the one who had left with nothing but a broken heart and a child on the way, was standing in front of him, a woman now. And yet, as he looked at her, he saw the same girl he had thrown out, the one he had never really understood. "What happened to you?" the mother whispered, almost to herself, as if hoping for an explanation she hadn't dared to ask before. The daughter took a deep breath. "I spent the last 15 years building a life. A better life than you ever gave me. And now, I'm here because I'm ready to show you who I've become." The father's heart sank. This wasn't just a visit. This was something more. Something he couldn't yet comprehend. A flood of emotions hit him all at once, regret, confusion, anger, and fear. He wanted to understand, but the words weren't coming. He didn't know if he was prepared to hear what she had to say. And yet, he knew one thing, her return wasn't just a coincidence. There was more to this story than he could possibly imagine. As the door clicked shut behind her, the storm outside raged on, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Something had been set in motion that could never be undone. Her return had begun, and with it, a long-hidden truth was about to surface. As the rain continued to batter against the windows, the silence between them grew thicker. The daughter sat down in the old chair across from her parents, her wet clothes sticking to her skin. It was clear she wasn't going anywhere, not this time. There was no avoiding what was about to come. The father stood by the window, staring out into the storm. He was lost in thought, trying to make sense of the girl who had once been his daughter, so full of life, so full of promise, and the woman who now sat before him, a stranger in some ways. He had never really known what happened after she left that night. All he knew was that she had disappeared, her absence like a wound that never healed. 15 years, he muttered under his breath. 15 years, and you just vanished. The daughter's gaze was unwavering. She had heard the words 1,000 times in her mind before she even came back here. She knew how they would feel, how they would sting. But she had made peace with them long ago. She had to, or she would have never survived. I didn't vanish, she said softly, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of sadness. I couldn't stay. You made sure of that. Her words hung in the air like a weight, and the father's chest tightened. There it was again. The guilt. The words he had never been able to take back. But what choice did he have? She had made her decision, and he had made his. They had both lived with the consequences. The mother, still standing by the doorway, finally spoke. What happened to you? Why didn't you ever reach out? Why didn't you let us know? Because you didn't want me, the daughter cut in, her eyes darkening. You told me that night that I wasn't welcome, that my child wasn't welcome. I was just a mistake, something that ruined your perfect life. You didn't want to be burdened by me, by the mess I brought with me. The words hit her parents like a slap, but they were true. They both knew it. The mother flinched, stepping back slightly. We were wrong. We were scared. We didn't know what to do, Anne. And I wasn't ready either, the daughter interrupted, her voice sharp but controlled. But I had no choice but to figure it out on my own. You never gave me a chance. I had to fight for my survival. The room felt smaller now. Every word, every confession, seemed to carry the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so many years. It wasn't just a matter of a daughter returning home after a long absence. It was a confrontation with the past, a confrontation with choices that had been made in the heat of the moment and never given the chance to heal. Her parents exchanged a glance, but neither knew how to respond. They had spent years convincing themselves that what they had done was for the best, that their actions were justified by their own fears. But now, in front of them, was the living proof that they had been wrong. The daughter stood up suddenly, her movements deliberate, as if she had finally reached the moment she had been preparing for all these years. She took a step closer, her gaze now locked onto her parents. I came back because I want you to understand, she said, her voice low but firm. I want you to see who I've become, what I've built. I want you to know that I didn't need you to succeed. I never did. There was pride in her voice now, and it was clear she wasn't seeking their approval, nor their forgiveness. She had long ago stopped waiting for that. But there was something else, too, something deeper. A question that had been left unanswered for years: why had she come back? She turned toward the door, and for a moment, neither of her parents moved. The mother's voice trembled as she spoke. Where are you going? She asked softly. To show you, the daughter replied. To show you what I've made of myself, and what you lost when you let me go. And just like that, she walked out into the storm again, leaving her parents to grapple with the truth that they had never expected. The storm had not let up. If anything, the rain had intensified, drumming heavily against the roof. Inside the house, it was eerily quiet now. The mother stood by the door, still watching the place where her daughter had just been, unsure of whether to call out or let her leave. The father, on the other hand, stood rooted in place, his mind replaying the past, trying to piece together the story of his daughter's life in the years she had been gone. But he had no answers. Only questions. And the silence seemed to suffocate him. The daughter's sudden departure had left an unsettling emptiness in the house, one that both parents felt deeply. They had spent years pretending that their daughter's absence was just something they would eventually move past. But now, standing in the echo of her words, the reality was undeniable. As the night dragged on, the father sank into a chair, exhaustion overtaking him. He closed his eyes, and suddenly, memories flooded his mind, memories of that night when they had thrown her out, the anger that had clouded his judgment, the harsh words that had wounded her. I couldn't do it, he murmured to himself. I couldn't protect her. I failed her. The mother, sitting beside him, wiped away a tear. We both failed her. Neither of them spoke again for a long time, but the weight of their regret hung heavy in the air. What had their daughter gone through all these years? What was her life like after they had turned their backs on her? The answer didn't come quickly. In fact, it was not until the next day that the parents got any sense of what their daughter had been through. Early in the morning, a knock at the door disturbed their restless sleep. It was the daughter, standing on the doorstep with a solemn expression. In her hand, she held a weathered box, one that looked far older than anything she had ever had with her before. She wasn't wet anymore, and the strength in her stance was palpable. She didn't look like the scared teenager who had left them all those years ago. She looked like someone who had lived through a storm of her own, and come out stronger for it. "I want you to see this," she said, her voice steady but with a touch of something almost unrecognizable, vulnerability, maybe, or just the weight of everything she had carried with her for so long. With hesitation, the parents stepped aside, and she walked into the house, her eyes not meeting theirs. Instead, she went straight to the kitchen table and placed the box down carefully, as if it were fragile. "Inside is everything I've been through," she said, looking up only briefly. "Every moment I fought for survival. Every scar I carry, not just on my body but in my heart." The father's heart sank as she opened the box. Inside, there were papers, photographs, and small mementos, things that told a story he hadn't expected, a story of hardship, struggle, and survival. The first photograph was of her, standing outside a tiny apartment complex, pregnant and alone, the weight of the world in her eyes. The mother gasped, but the daughter was already flipping through the box, showing them more images, of jobs she had taken, of sleepless nights, of her child growing up without the support she had once taken for granted. There were letters, too, letters from people who had helped her, who had shown her kindness when the world had been cold. The father reached out to touch one of the photographs, his fingers trembling. You did all this on your own?" The daughter nodded. "I didn't have a choice. You didn't want me, so I had to learn to want myself." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in before continuing. "I built my life from nothing. And when I became strong enough, I went back to school. I became successful. I did everything that you never believed I could." Each picture, each memento, carried the story of the years she had spent in the shadows, far from the family that had once rejected her. But in those shadows, she had found a version of herself that was unbreakable. "We were wrong," the mother whispered, her voice breaking. "We should have never." The daughter raised a hand to stop her. "I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here because I need you to understand who I became. I want you to know that I am not the same person you threw away." And with that, the unspoken truth between them became clear. She wasn't just coming back for answers. She was coming back to show them what they had missed, what they had failed to see when they had given up on her. The room was heavy with emotion. There was guilt. There was regret. But there was also something else, a realization that things could change. They could rebuild, if they were willing to try. But the question remained, would they? The room was quiet now, the air thick with emotion as the daughter's words echoed in the silence. The photographs and letters still lay on the table, evidence of her painful yet powerful journey. But despite everything she had shown them, the parents still had questions, questions that seemed impossible to ask, yet needed to be spoken. The father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his mind racing. He had never imagined that his daughter's absence had been this complicated, this painful. All these years, he had told himself that it was for the best, that she had gone on to live a life of her own, and that was just the way things were. But now, sitting in front of her, all the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. He wanted to ask her everything, why she never contacted them, what had really happened during those years, and most of all, why she was back now. What did she want from them after all this time? "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why now? After all this time? Why come back to us?" The daughter sat across from him, her face calm but with an unmistakable weight behind her eyes. She looked at him for a long moment before replying. "I didn't come back for you. I came back for me," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "I spent 15 years thinking about this moment, imagining what it would feel like to walk back through that door. But the truth is, it wasn't about getting an apology or any kind of recognition. I needed to show you that I didn't need you to survive. I wanted to show you the person I've become. That's all." Her words hit harder than anything the father had expected. All these years, he had hoped for some kind of reconciliation, some sign that things could go back to normal, but now he understood. She wasn't here to heal their wounds. She had long since healed her own. The mother, who had been silently observing, spoke up, her voice trembling. "But we were wrong, so wrong. We should have never thrown you out like that. We—" "Stop," the daughter interrupted, holding up her hand. "You can't change the past. Neither of us can. What happened, happened. All I can do is move forward. And I don't need your approval to do that anymore." The words stung, but they were the truth. There was no going back. They had made choices all those years ago, and those choices had led them to this moment, facing a daughter who had endured more than they could ever truly comprehend. But as much as the parents tried to hide their guilt, the burning questions still lingered. The father cleared his throat. "But what about your child? Where is he? Why didn't you bring him here? Why didn't you tell us about him?" The daughter looked down at the table, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the box. For the first time, her expression faltered. "He's grown now. He's 14. And he doesn't even know you exist." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. The father swallowed hard, the pain of that truth sinking into his chest. A child, their grandchild, had been out there for all these years, and they had never known. You never thought to tell us?" the mother asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't," the daughter replied, her voice now quieter. "I didn't want him to feel the same rejection I felt. I didn't want him to know what it was like to have grandparents who turned their back on him before he even had a chance to be born." There was a long pause as the parents processed her words. The regret was now more palpable than ever. They hadn't just lost their daughter, they had lost an entire future. And the realization hit them like a thunderclap. The daughter hadn't just walked away from them, she had walked away to protect herself and her child from the same heartbreak they had caused her. "I've tried," the daughter continued, her voice steadier now. "I've tried to be the kind of mother I never had, the kind of person I needed to be. I couldn't come back before. I wasn't ready to face all of this. But now, I'm here to show you the person I am, not the person I was." The father sat back, stunned by the revelation. There was nothing left to say. He had no words that could undo the damage, no apology that could make up for the years they had lost. And yet, as he looked at his daughter, he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of something he hadn't expected. Forgiveness. It wasn't immediate, nor was it perfect. But it was there, deep inside her, a quiet willingness to move forward. For the first time, the father understood that while they couldn't undo the past, there was still hope for the future. But would they have the strength to face the truth, to rebuild what had been broken? The room was heavy with silence. Every word, every glance, seemed to carry the weight of years that could never be returned. The father sat motionless, the full impact of the situation slowly sinking in. His daughter, once the young girl he had thrown out so recklessly, was now standing before him, a woman who had built a life far beyond his understanding. The mother wiped away a tear, her hand trembling as it hovered near her mouth. "How could we have been so blind?" she whispered. "How could we not see what you were going through?" The daughter's gaze softened for a moment, but she didn't offer any comforting words. She didn't need to. She had been through too much, learned too much, to offer easy forgiveness. Instead, she quietly moved back to the table and began to gather the photographs and letters. "I don't expect you to understand," she said, her voice steady. "But I want you to know how far I've come. I've fought every day to make sure my son, and myself, had everything we needed. I didn't just survive, I thrived. Despite what you did, despite what you said, I still made it." She paused for a moment, as if contemplating whether to say more. When she spoke again, her voice was tinged with an emotion that neither of her parents had expected. "I've never hated you for what happened," she admitted quietly. "I've been angry, I've been hurt. But I've never hated you. I don't have room for that in my life anymore. I needed to heal, and I needed to do that on my own. I couldn't wait for you to apologize. I had to find a way to make peace with everything myself." The father could feel the sting of those words deep in his chest. His daughter was not angry anymore. She was not a victim. She was a woman who had taken control of her life and fought through every battle that had come her way. And in doing so, she had left him and his wife behind, unable to catch up to the woman they had once pushed away. "Where is he?" the mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where's your son? We've missed so much. I've missed him." The daughter didn't meet her gaze at first. There was a long pause as she gathered her thoughts, and when she finally spoke, her words were measured, deliberate. "He's with a friend," she said. "I didn't want him to see all this right away. He's still young, and he's had a tough time of his own. He needs to understand his own story before he's forced to face mine." The mother nodded, though the ache in her heart was palpable. She had hoped for a reunion, for a moment where everything could just fall into place, where she could hold her grandchild in her arms and make everything right. But she knew now that those things weren't as simple as she had imagined. The daughter continued, a hint of pride in her voice. "He's been my motivation. He's the reason I never gave up, never stopped fighting. He's the reason I'm here today, showing you who I've become. You may not have been there when I needed you, but I learned to be everything he needed. And that's all that matters now." The father's face was lined with regret. He wanted to say something, something that would take back the years, something that could mend the rift that had grown so wide between them. But the words wouldn't come. He wasn't sure if there were any words left to say. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her for the first time in years. She was no longer the scared teenager who had walked out of their lives in search of something they couldn't give her. She had become someone strong, someone resilient. And somewhere, deep down, he knew that he had played a part in shaping her into the person she was now, though not in the way he had ever intended. "I don't know how to fix this," he said softly. "But I do know this, I want to try. I want to make it right, at least for the future. I don't want to lose you again." The daughter's eyes softened just slightly, but there was no immediate warmth in her expression. "It's not about fixing it," she said. "It's about accepting what happened, learning from it, and moving forward. I don't need your approval anymore. I've built my own life, and I'm proud of it. But I'm here now because I believe that even after everything, there's still something worth saving." The father sat back in his chair, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. His daughter wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't even asking for a fresh start. She was simply acknowledging what had been and showing them what they had missed. And in doing so, she had shown him something far more powerful, the strength of someone who had never given up, even when the world had turned its back on her. She stood up and moved toward the door, her movements slow but determined. "I need to go now," she said quietly. "But I'll be back. I'll give you time to think, and when you're ready, we can talk. But I'm not waiting for your approval anymore. I've waited long enough for that." As she stepped out into the rain once more, her parents were left in the heavy silence of the house, each of them thinking about everything that had just transpired. The question still lingered in the air, unanswered, but now they understood that this wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about learning to live with the truth and facing the consequences of their actions. And maybe, just maybe, it was about hope for a future where they could rebuild what had been broken, even if it was only a small piece at a time. The rain finally slowed to a soft drizzle as the daughter left, leaving her parents to ponder everything she had revealed. It was as though the storm outside had mirrored the turmoil within the house. The father couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted permanently. His daughter had grown, and so had he, though it was unclear whether it was for the better or worse. For days, neither of them spoke much. The house felt empty, quieter than it ever had been. The guilt that weighed on their hearts remained, but something else was growing, a sense of awareness, a realization that they hadn't just been wrong in their actions all those years ago. They had been blind, and now, with the heavy truth laid bare, they could see the power their daughter had cultivated in her absence. The daughter, on the other hand, was not sitting idle. She had a life to live, and more importantly, she had made her own peace. She spent the next few days with her son, letting him adjust to the new reality. But the thought of her parents lingered in the back of her mind. She had come back for a reason, and despite their reluctance to fully embrace the past, she wasn't giving up. The truth was, she had already forgiven them. In her heart, she knew that forgiveness was not about erasing the past, it was about accepting it and choosing to move forward, stronger than before. She had done that. Now it was time for them to do the same. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was her parents, standing there hesitantly. The father looked nervous, the mother tearful but hopeful. They had clearly come to terms with what had happened, but the words they needed to speak were still hard to form. "We've thought about everything," the father said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've talked. And we're ready to start over. We know we can't change what happened, but we want to try, at least for the future." The daughter, who had been sitting quietly in the living room, looked at them with a mixture of surprise and resolve. She had expected this moment to come eventually, but hearing them say it out loud felt like an acknowledgement of everything she had fought for. "It's not about starting over," she said gently, her voice steady but kind. "It's about moving forward. And it's about trust. If we're going to rebuild something, it has to be based on truth. We can't keep pretending that nothing happened. I can't do that anymore." The mother nodded, tears in her eyes. "We know. We're not asking for you to forgive us right away. But we want to be part of your life again. And we want to be part of his life," she said, her hand reaching out to gesture toward the empty chair where her grandchild had once been. "We want to be a family again." The daughter's expression softened. She had seen their regret, their pain, and most of all, their desire to make things right. It wasn't easy for them, just as it hadn't been easy for her. But there was something in her heart that knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and yet, it would be worth it. "I'm not going to pretend everything's okay," she said, standing up. "But we can try. We can build something together again. But it's not just about you and me. It's about us all. And I need to see that you're willing to do the work. I won't be the one carrying all of it anymore." There was a pause as they absorbed her words. The father looked at the mother, and the look they shared said everything. They understood now. They weren't asking her to carry the burden alone. They had to work to earn her trust, to prove that they could be the kind of family they had failed to be before. "We will," the father said, finally, his voice firm. "We will do whatever it takes." It was then that the daughter realized something profound: she had the power now. She was no longer the helpless teenager who had been cast aside. She had built a life of strength, and she had every right to shape her future, to decide who would be a part of it and how. She wasn't the one waiting for validation anymore. She had become her own validation. And as they stood there, facing each other, parents and daughter, something shifted. It wasn't a magical fix. There were still broken pieces, and the road ahead would be long. But in that moment, they were all willing to try. They were all willing to move forward, with open eyes and open hearts. And for the first time in 15 years, they felt like they had a chance to rebuild, not just as a family, but as people who had learned from the past and were determined to make the future different. The daughter smiled softly, her gaze steady. "Let's start small. Let's take this one step at a time." And with that, they began their journey, together. The weeks that followed were not easy. The road to healing, to truly rebuilding what had been broken, was long and often painful. The daughter, while determined to move forward, knew that old wounds had not healed overnight. She had made her peace with the past, but her parents had to do the same. It wasn't just about saying the right things, it was about showing up, day after day, proving that they had changed. The parents, for their part, did everything they could to make amends. They spent time together, trying to understand what their daughter had endured, listening when she spoke of her struggles and her triumphs. They helped where they could, offering support to her son, and slowly, they began to build a new relationship, a more honest, more open one. They no longer took each other for granted. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer had the power to define their future. And yet, despite all the progress, there was still one question that lingered in the back of the daughter's mind. It was the question that had brought her back in the first place, the question of whether, after everything, her family could ever truly understand what she had been through. It was one afternoon, sitting on the porch with her parents, that the truth finally came to the surface. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks," the daughter said, gazing out at the horizon. "I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you just give away. It's something you earn, every single day. And that's not easy. I know it's not." Her parents nodded in agreement, their faces somber. The father, who had been the one most resistant to accepting the past, spoke up. "I can't undo what I did. I can't take back the years we lost. But I can tell you this, I will never make that mistake again. I will never look at you and see anything other than my daughter, no matter what." The mother, her eyes filled with both love and sorrow, added, "And I can't change the way I acted, the way I failed you, but I can promise you that from now on, you'll never have to face anything alone again. I'm here, for you and for your son." The daughter smiled, though there was still a sadness in her eyes. "I don't need you to fix everything," she said softly. "I've learned to live without your help. But I'm willing to share my life with you again. I'm willing to show you what I've become. And I want you to see it, not as some broken version of the girl you once knew, but as the woman I am now." There was a quiet moment of reflection, and then the daughter added, her voice almost a whisper, "I came back not because I needed to be fixed, but because I wanted to show you that strength doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from surviving. From standing back up after you've been knocked down. From making a life when the world tells you there's no way forward. And no matter how much time has passed, I've learned that I can keep going. I will keep going." The father, fighting back tears, stood up and walked over to her. "You've taught us more than we could ever teach you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown us what real strength looks like." And in that moment, the daughter understood. She had always believed that forgiveness was about forgetting the past. But she had learned that it was so much more than that. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the hurt, it was about growing beyond it, about finding a way to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. The parents had failed her once, but in this moment, they had shown up for her in a way they never had before. They had earned her trust, not by pretending the past didn't exist, but by accepting it and choosing to move forward together. As the evening sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the porch, the daughter sat back, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from forgetting or sweeping things under the rug. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing that the journey was not about erasing the past, but about learning from it and embracing the future. The lesson was clear: strength comes from within, but it is also shaped by the people who stand with you. It is found not just in overcoming the obstacles in your path, but in the willingness to face the truth, to accept it, and to move forward with hope. In that moment, surrounded by her parents, she knew that the journey was far from over. But it was a journey they would take together. And for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at home.